If you want to write stories your readers will love, there are 3 things you need to do. Understand storytelling principles, see how other writers have applied those principles, and then use them in your own work. Here on the Story Nerd podcast, our goal is to demystify story theory. We'll help you with the first 2 steps so that you can get started with the third. I'm Melanie Hill, writer, editor and poet, and I have a passion for spy stories, fairy tales and master detective novels.
And I'm Valerie Francis. I'm a writer and literary editor, and I focus on stories by, for, and about women.
So on today's episode, Valerie and I will look back over season 5 and discuss what we've learned about resonance and plot structure. And we'd also love it if you could give the show a rating and review. For Apple Podcast listeners, you can do it right from your phone. Simply go to the show's landing page and scroll to the bottom. It's that simple. All right, Valerie, why don't you start us off by telling us what your big aha moments were with respect to plot structure?
Well, this is a topic that most writers don't think about at all. In fact, most writers, most theorists even, aren't aware of it. And yet it's one of the first decisions that we have to make when we sit down to start writing a novel or a screenplay or a stage play. I get questions all the time, and Melanie, I'm sure you do too. But the questions I get are about how do I write a story with more than one protagonist, or how do I write a story with a main character that has a big arc in it, or in them. Well, when we understand plot structure, many of these kinds of questions get answered for us. Now, I'll be honest, I'm not keen on the term plot structure. I mean, it sounds pretty boring. I do know that, but I don't know what else to call it. So, maybe story form, maybe that sounds a little more interesting. But in terms of aha moments, well, I have a few. So McKee's concept of the story triangle really helps me bring order to this topic, order in my mind, and I really appreciate that. There are 3 points on the triangle and 3 sides, obviously. Each one refers to a different kind of narrative. Now, I covered 5 of them in the season: arc plot, mini plot, antiplot, multiplot, and quasi-antiplot. The 6th is called non-plot, and I didn't cover it because it doesn't relate to story. It has no plot, and McKee says that this form can be loosely called a narrative, but it's not a story. And I'm all about the story, clearly. Another aha for me is that this topic isn't covered in most theory books. McKee is the only one I know of who is even aware of it. Now, it's in the story grid, What Good Editors Know, but Sean Coyne studied with and worked with Robert McKee, so I'm sure that's the influence there. So if you know of another theory book or course or something that gets into this topic of plot structure, please let me know. Reach out to me on Twitter or Instagram at Valerie_Francis and let me know. And if you hear about this, just check to see, are they focused on arc plot only? That tends to be what happens. And it's not always clear that the author is aware that they're focusing on an arc plot story structure. Now, either that's because they just don't know, or they think that it's too advanced or too complicated or too complex for their reader. I have no idea why that is. I'm saying it not to be critical of other theorists, but so that you can be aware of what's happening when you approach a theory book or a course to sort of learn how to do this job better. Because now that you've listened to the last 10 episodes, you're aware that there are different forms. And if you pick up a theory book that's focused on arc plot structure, but you really want to know more about writing a story with multiple protagonists, it's not going to help you as much as maybe you need. And if you're aware that it's sort of apples to oranges, maybe, then you can pull out the bits of information that help you write your multiplot story and leave the rest. I just want you to be mindful of it, that's all. Aha moments, more of them. It didn't surprise me, honestly, that most of the films we covered this season are arc plot. And Melanie, you and I talked about this before we even recorded any of the episodes. Um, you were concerned that that might happen, and I wasn't concerned because, to be honest, most of the stories, 97% or 90% for sure, watching and consuming today, they're arc plot. So, in light of that, as we sit down to invest 2 or more years in writing our own novels, we've got to really be honest with ourselves about what our goals are. Whatever the goals are fine. We just have to be honest about them. So often I hear writers say to me that they don't care if anyone ever reads their book and they don't care if anyone ever buys their book. But they also, in the same breath, tell me that they do want to get an agent and they want to get published and they want to see their books in the bookstore. They want to walk into their local bookstore and see their book on the shelf. Well, okay, you might not care if your book sells, but your agent cares because they're not going to earn any money unless they sell the book. And the publisher cares because they're investing heavily in bringing your book to market and they need to recoup those losses. And the bookstore owner cares because your book has taken up valuable real estate on that shelf. They have to earn money. They got to pay their staff. They got to pay their mortgage and all that kind of stuff. They got to stay in business. So given that arc plot is what most of us want when we read a book, it's the expectation. That's where your reader is starting from when they pick up your book. When you know that, understanding the different options of story form and the expectations that your reader has becomes super important. And the last aha for me that I want to highlight is that anti-plot and quasi-anti-plot stories still have a plot. They subvert the arc plot story either partially or in full, but those subversions aren't random or arbitrary. This isn't a free-for-all. It isn't a license just to write a bunch of crap on paper and call yourself an author, which some people do. It's still a story. You still have to know what you're doing. In fact, you really need to understand the arc plot structure so well that you can mess around with it and still create a story that entertains your audience. Because whatever else it is you're trying to do with your book, job number one is to entertain. I know that's hard to accept sometimes, but it's true. Okay, Melanie, what are your aha moments about plot structure?
Well, your deep dive into the types of story structure and how it impacts the way a story is told has been invaluable for me this season. And choosing the plot structure comes down to the type of story you're trying to tell and who you want to tell it to. Now, this takes skill and it's a high risk profile, I think, to execute well. And especially the more you move away from the arc plot structure, the smaller the audience is likely to become, right? So moving away from the arc plot or classic plot structure, I think should be done with caution. And I think that reiterates the point that you were just making. So, the examples that you've chosen this season have, I think, at times been challenging to watch and enjoy. But they've been good. And the Accidental Tourist and Nashville were good examples of the mini plot and multi-plot structures, but I can't say that I really enjoyed watching those a great deal. And we've watched a few stories now that I thought would have been better as books too. So I know that the Accidental Tourist film is based on the book, and I wouldn't be surprised if the book is actually better than the movie, but I haven't read it. But it is now on my to-be-read list. So I enjoyed Wayne's World because it didn't take itself too seriously. It used comedy as a way to navigate the anti-plot structure. Now, I've been and seen a few absurdist plays over the years, and that would probably sit in the anti-plot section of McKee's Triangle, or those plays would sit in that section. And I think the comedy in Wayne's World made the plot structure way more palatable, in my opinion, when I think about the way the stories were delivered. And I also think that theatre probably lends itself more to anti-plot stories, more than movies do, because of the constraints a live performance offers to writers. But, they're just things to think about. And I think when you were talking, Valerie, before about the first thing you have to decide is how to tell your story, that's one of the considerations that we're making, right, is the form or the method of delivery of whether it's a novel, a film, or a play. And then, understanding story structure, I think really, if we're trying to decide which mode, that really comes into its own in that way. So understanding it is really important for those types of decisions. The biggest takeaway for me was that I like the arc plot stories, and there are very good reasons for that. These stories make sense to me. And while I don't agree completely with McKee's explanation that most people see conflict as external to themselves and they see themselves as the single protagonist in their own story, or that life delivers closed experiences, that we finalize and move on from, because none of that reflects my experience of life. I prefer stories with bittersweet endings or open endings. I like protagonists who have internal and external conflicts and characters who are complex. But ultimately, I believe that life changes us and broadens us as time moves on. So the arc plot represents a very good option to simulate life in story that way. And also, I would really like my stories to reach the broadest possible audience. So I'm going to stick to the most common and the most understood form of story structure.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. The further you move away from arc plot, the smaller your audience gets. And when you're talking about, you preferring stories with bittersweet endings and the like, there's the sliding scale between arc plot and, say, mini plot. So you might not want a story like the stories that you like best might not be all the way over to arc plot, but they're leaning toward arc plot. This is really interesting to me. I don't know if anybody else cares, but I think this is fascinating.
No, that's a really good point. And understanding the scale, so understanding those 3 points and the extreme forms of those story structures is important. But then looking at what you can vary or what you like in a story and seeing how that varies from the absolute is really key. And that's where the triangle has been great. I think that triangle, like, you found it invaluable. I found it invaluable as well in understanding, that it's not just all this. There could be parts of, anti-plot in there or, mini plot. And that gives us options, but constrained options. So I've overtaken. What I'm trying to say is that I've really found it valuable, and it's helped me nail down the types of stories that I like and that I would like to tell and how to go about understanding and doing that. So sorry.
No. And a question I have that we didn't really get into, because I have no idea what the answer is, but it's another question I have. I'm wondering how point of view plays into all of this. And specifically, is second person point of view in a novel, or breaking the, where, like in Ferris Bueller's Day Off, where Ferris talks directly to camera, or in the theater when they break the fourth wall, is that a form of, would that be quasi anti-plot? Like, if that's the one thing that changes? Because in a novel, second person point of view, you're talking to the reader. So I have no idea what the answer is, but it's not pure arc plot. You know what I mean, Jellybean?
Yeah, I do. And you see that more and more so now. So the series by Phoebe Waller-Bridge, Fleabag, she breaks the fourth wall in that all the time. But there's a very deliberate choice to do that. And it's resolved at the end of the second series. Sorry, spoilers. And but it's a very clever, and when you get to the end, you understand what breaking the fourth wall is doing and why the character of Fleabag does that. And that is becoming more common, I think. But she's an excellent writer. Do you know, and I think that those writers who use that to great effect are very skillful. And it's consistent as well. Like, you wouldn't go and break the fourth wall once in a story and then not do it again, because that's going to break you out of it. But yeah, understanding that convention, how to break it and how to apply it, slides the story down a scale. But I don't know if it would, how far it drives it down that scale either. So that's the interesting thing. Maybe it's a cumulative effect. And I think point of view does, in a way, it changes the way a story is told. And sometimes when I'm stuck, I prefer third person, but if I'm stuck, I will go and rewrite a scene in a different point of view, because that helps me get things unstuck. So it shifts my mind from being the person on the shoulder to being the character if I go from third to first, or vice versa. And so I think that does change some ways the story structure, and what devices you can use to within that story triangle to best tell your story. And I haven't, that's just an off the top response to a question you just put out there, but it warrants further thinking, especially if you're story nerds like us, right?
Totally. This is the fun stuff to think about. A friend of mine asked me one time, "What do you think about when you fall asleep at night?" And I'm like, "Story theory?"
Is there anything else?
Exactly. Oh my. So, I mean, this is the bottom line here, right? Understanding, first of all, what an arc plot structure is, but really understanding it and being able to pull it off. Because somewhere, I mentioned this in one of the episodes, I don't remember which one, but it's a quote from McKee, which basically is saying, just because you can read the theory from this book, and just because you can recognize something in somebody else's work, doesn't mean you know it yet. You have to be able to use it. That's when you really know it. So if you're on your first book or one of your first 3 or 4 books, make an arc plot, really understand how that works and be able to execute it, so that you know what you're doing when you want to vary it, when you want to start wandering away from arc plot, so that you can write a story that works, that people are going to want to buy and read all the way to the end, and then tell their friends about, because that is not a small task. That is a very big task. First, people think that selling the books are the hard part. No, selling the books are not the hard part, because it's easier to get someone to buy a book than it is to get someone to read a book all the way to the end and get them to tell their friends about it. So the first part, buying the book, that's just marketing, just marketing. But that's marketing skills. It's the back cover copy. It's the front cover. It's getting the word out. There are skills that you see measurable results in that side. It's very left brain. After that, the book has to be really well written. You got to hook them early, and you got to keep hooking them and hold their attention all the way to the last page. That is 90% of the work. And the marketing is just the 10%. And if your book is no good, then any time and energy and effort that you're putting into marketing is a waste, because you're not building an audience. You're not developing a fan base. This is becoming a marketing discussion, but anyone who's running a business knows that your biggest expense is new customer acquisition. For us, that's finding new readers. It's much better for us to sell book 2 to the same person who bought book 1. It's going to be cheaper, faster, easier than it is to find somebody else to buy book 2, because the person who bought book one, never finished it, and they didn't tell anybody about it because it really wasn't that good. You know what I mean? So it just makes so much sense for so many different reasons. Anyway, Melanie, you were talking about resonance this season. So what have you got for us?
All right. Well, I have deepened my understanding of how resonance works in stories this season, and I have loved diving deeper into this key story theory subject. Over the season, I've come to believe that resonance is the secret sauce in successful stories. Could I get many more S's in the end of that sentence? Some alliteration for you. Anyway, so a recap on what resonance is. So the new Oxford American Dictionary definition of resonance is the ability to evoke or suggest images, emotions, and memories. And how does it work? Well, resonance is like a refrain in music, and a refrain is something that repeats itself throughout a song. Each time a refrain is repeated, the message in the refrain becomes stronger and more significant. This happens in story also. So stories draw on what has gone before. So one story is the basis for another, and so on. Readers seek out similar stories they love with the aim of recapturing or reliving the feeling they experienced in the previous story. Now, Dave Farland, in his book Drawing on the Power of Resonance in Writing, proposes that there are 3 types of resonance, and he calls them genre, life, and emotional needs. Now, I'll quickly go through these again. So genre, and I'm using the widest possible definition of genre, and by that I mean the type of story that resonates through time. And now this could be an alien love story, superhero story, a horror story. But that is what we mean by genre, so the type of story. We have life, so life resonance. People read and relate to stories that resemble their own life experience. So, we can write stories that focus on similar age groups, genders, nationalities, and just overall experience of life. And then he puts forward the final one, which is emotional needs. So we often choose a particular type of story because we are seeking to relive a positive emotional experience. Now, through the study that I've done this season, I'm going to add internal resonance to this list. So internal resonance is the repeat of a similar type of scene, but with an escalation of stakes as the story progresses, or slight variations. So I think that there are 4 types of resonance to consider as a writer. Now, over the season, we've seen how storytellers like Guillermo del Toro draw on resonance from their own life experience so that they can create stories that they love. Now, del Toro used elements of Gothic stories to create his setting. He drew on fairy tales. He drew from his own fascination with the movie The Creature from the Black Lagoon. And he also drew on his Catholic upbringing. So he used all 4 types of resonance in The Shape of Water. Now, resonance also helped me identify what I thought didn't work with the story or the movie The Force Awakens. Now, the role of the mentor and the authority of the antagonist weren't fully realized in this movie because they didn't resonate, when they didn't repeat the expectations we have for these characters within the Skywalker saga. Now, the role of these characters shifted too far away from our expectations. So this is really a great tool, right? So understanding why we don't believe a story works is invaluable. And it's taken my study of resonance to pinpoint something that has been bothering me for a few years. And so you can use resonance as a diagnostic tool. Now, if you'd like to learn more about resonance, then I really do recommend Dave Farland's book, Drawing on the Power of Resonance in Writing. But there's also nothing better than examining how your own favourite writers use resonance and then applying the same techniques to your own stories. So, Valerie, what have you learnt about resonance this season?
My big aha with respect to resonance is this. It's not only an important writing tool, but it's directly related to marketing. I must have marketing on the brain this week. I was really fascinated to see how this was playing out week after week. So, if you want to learn about marketing, start with Seth Godin. All marketing roads lead to Seth Godin. This is something I have discovered. And he talks about giving your customer a hook to hang your product or service on. So, in other words, explain what you're doing in relation to something that your customer, or in our case, the reader, already understands. In other words, explain your product or service in a way that resonates with the customer. This is really cool. And I mean, that's exactly what we need to do when we want to sell our books, whether we're selling directly to the reader or we're selling to an agent or getting the sales package ready to go to an acquisitions editor. So, for example, when we say we're writing a thriller, there's an understanding of what thriller means. We instantly think of other thrillers, and therefore we're expecting something along those lines because a thriller resonates with us in a particular way or doesn't resonate with us. We hear it's a thriller and we turn away from it because we don't like thrillers. One of the best taglines in book marketing that I've come across is for The Book of Life, the TV show. And the ad read that it was Twilight for grown-ups. That is brilliant marketing, and it relies on resonance because we know what Twilight is, and we know it's for kids, so this is for grown-ups. Now, you touched on this already, Melanie. Resonance is crucial for a series, and I found that really interesting with Aliens and Star Wars. Even though it didn't fully work in Star Wars, it did work to a point. And it's just as important for standalone books too, or for old stories that are being made new again. And last week you talked at great length about The Great Gatsby and how, even though that's 100 years old, it's resonating with readers and audiences today, which is why Baz Luhrmann made the movie, frankly. Those themes and those characters, we totally understand what's happening there. So I guess my big aha with respect to resonance is that it's a broad topic and it touches every aspect of the writer's job, from writing the book to selling the book.
Yeah, it's broad, right? It's a broad thing, and if you can tap into that and understand it, you can apply it to all aspects of life and not just your writing. Like you mentioned, marketing, but it's also a great way in terms of conversations with people to find the things that you have in common and to talk about those sorts of things. So, resonance is alive and well, and it's just not very widely discussed in a writing context. And that's what I think I've really enjoyed diving down and finding out some new things about resonance this season. Resonance is created via many different means in stories and in life. So if you think about it most broadly, names, setting, types of characters, book covers, movie posters, all of those things create or draw on resonance. But if we narrow it down into stories, the most powerful stories are those that use all three, or what I think are four types of resonance, and especially that internal resonance within a story. And this is where those similar themes and events are repeated but varied. So this is when a similar theme or event are repeated but varied. The stories that have this internal resonance are perhaps the most successful stories we've seen this season. Now I'm thinking about Lego Batman, When Harry Met Sally, and The Shape of Water. So don't be afraid to repeat events or characters in your stories. Repetition in and between stories is internal resonance. all the movies we watched this season are relatively successful, and they've all used repetition. We saw how to use repetition in sequels like Aliens and The Force Awakens. We saw that repeating types of events enhanced the themes of a story and also provided an avenue for character arcs in movies like Lego Batman, When Harry Met Sally, and The Great Gatsby. There was also repeating character types with subtle changes. So we think about the analysis we did of Aliens, The Force Awakens, and also Gatsby. We have also seen how subgenres are important in storytelling via movies like Men in Black, which draws from invasion literature, and also the continual reappearance of Men in Black in stories over time. So my best advice from studying resonance is understand the genre you're writing in. Resonance is a powerful tool. Write what is expected for the type of story you'd like to tell. Draw on the power of resonance and use it effectively. Don't shy away from it in an attempt to create something so unique that no one will read. All right, that's roughly my takeaway. Repetition is key, but variation in repetition is also key. And you can do that if you understand resonance, in my view.
Whew, what a season. Can you believe we're at the end of season 5? So that means next week we start season 6. So Melanie, what's your topic for next season?
Well, next season I'm raising the stakes. So I'm going to study stakes. So that's more about what do the characters in stories have to lose or have to gain. So that's what I'll be focusing on next season. What about you?
I'm going to be talking about creating empathy. In other words, how to get a reader emotionally connected to your story. You don't want to miss next season.
Right. Oh, no, I'm excited because empathy, it is key, right? It is such a key thing when you're reading stories. The moment you can feel that empathy towards a character, you've hooked a reader, I think. So I can't wait to see what you bring into the next season. All right, so that wraps it up for this week. Join us again next week when we discuss The King's Speech. To support the show, please leave us a rating and review and tell your writer friends about us. For access to writing templates and worksheets and more than 70 hours of training, subscribe to Valerie's Inner Circle by visiting valeriefrancis.ca/inner circle and follow her on Twitter and Instagram at Valerie_Francis. And if you'd like to find out about books to help you read like a writer, visit me on Facebook and Instagram under Melanie Hill Author, or find out more about me at melaniehill.com.au. And remember, story theory doesn't have to be difficult. It's a tool to help you write more, not less. So take it one step at a time and have fun.